I stood by the staircase, froze in the shadows of the banister cutting across my face like prison bars. The sound of my husband's voice drifted from the kitchen, warm, familiar, almost comforting. Except, the words he spoke didn't belong to the man I had once trusted with my whole heart. "I'm just tired of pretending," Daniel said, his voice casual, almost relieved. "She's like dead weight now. She can't hear a word, and honestly, it's peaceful." My heart plummeted into a darkness I couldn't describe. Dead weight. That was what I was to him now. The husband I once thought was my rock, my protector, was calling me a burden behind my back. I pressed myself flat against the wall, barely breathing, the wood cool against my skin. They thought I couldn't hear, that I was still trapped in silence. But 2 days ago, something miraculous had happened. After 4 endless weeks of living in a world where sound was nothing but memory, my hearing had returned. And I hadn't told a soul. Not even Daniel. At first I thought I would tell him immediately. I wanted to run into his arms, cry into his chest, tell him I could hear his laugh again, his footsteps, the way he hummed off key when he shaved in the mornings. But something stopped me. Something small at first. A shadow in his eyes. The way his smile no longer reached them. The way his patience had worn down to a thread. And now, listening to him call me dead weight in the kitchen, I realized my silence had been the only shield I had. Grace's voice joined in. My mother-in-law. Sharp, cold, cruel. "I told you from the start, Daniel. She was never your level. I begged you not to marry her." I closed my eyes. Only an hour ago she had smiled at me sweetly, brought me soup, touched my hand like a caring mother. Now I heard the venom drip from her voice as easily as water from a tap. Daniel sighed. "I know, Mom, but I'm stuck now. People would hate me if I left her while she's like this. Like this. Like I was broken. Like I was nothing but an obligation." And then came the dagger. He muttered almost wistfully, "I should have married Vanessa when I had the chance." The name twisted in my stomach like a blade. Vanessa. His ex. The one who mocked me at our engagement party, whispering that I was plain, boring, forgettable. The one who had flirted with him in front of me at that charity dinner, smiling like she already owned him. He swore to me back then that she meant nothing. But his voice tonight told me the truth he had hidden for years. And then Grace leans in, her words sharper than any knife. "What about the money? Has she signed anything yet?" I froze. "The money?" Daniel asked carefully. "Her mother's estate," Grace hissed. "The house, the land, the bank account in her name. You said she hasn't touched it since the funeral. Now's your chance. Make her sign power of attorney. If she's still deaf and confused, she won't even know what she's agreeing to." My throat went dry. My mother's inheritance. The house I grew up in. The savings account she opened for me when I was 10, the one I never touched because it felt too sacred after she passed. They wanted it. They wanted to strip me of the last piece of her I had left. "She'll trust you," Grace went on. "She always does. Just smile and put the papers in front of her. She won't ask questions." Daniel's voice was low, uncertain. "I'll try. But if she doesn't sign, we'll need another way." Another way. The words chilled my blood. I pressed a trembling hand to my stomach, trying to steady my breath. I wanted to burst in, to scream, to throw dishes across the kitchen. But instead, I turned silently away. My steps were heavy, like I was dragging a dead version of myself down the hall. Back in the guest room, I sat on the bed and stared at the wall, my ears ringing not from injury this time, but from the betrayal echoing in my chest. Just weeks ago, I never would have doubted Daniel. I believed he loved me. When I lost my hearing in that accident, I thought he had been my anchor. The man who stayed beside me when I was terrified, who scribbled sticky notes that said "I love you," who installed transcription apps to help me understand. But slowly, those gestures had vanished. The note stopped. The app was forgotten. His patience turned into sighs, his touch into obligation. I noticed the absence of eye contact, the coldness in his smile. And Grace, she had been there too, her visits wrapped in sugar but laced with poison. I had caught glimpses of her disdain, whispers half read from her lips when she thought I wasn't looking. "She'll never see it coming. He just needs to act sweet, and she'll hand it all over." Those words haunted me, And now here in the silence of my room, the truth crystallized. They didn't want me. They wanted what was mine. I hugged myself, my fingers digging into my arms. I wanted to cry, but no tears came. Instead, there was only a stillness, a cold, sharp awareness that I had been living with shadows and pretending they were love. When you lose your hearing, you learn to read people differently. Their lips, their eyes, the way their shoulders rise when they lie. I had been blind in a different way, convincing myself that Daniel's distance was stress, that Grace's words were misunderstandings. But now, with sound restored, I could no longer pretend. I lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling as if it could give me answers. Inside me, two voices clashed. One begged me to run, to leave, to cut them out of my life before they could take more. The other whispered that I needed to stay quiet, to watch, to gather proof. And then I remembered something my mother once told me when I was just a teenager. Never let them think you're weaker than you are. Silence can be the sharpest blade. So I chose silence. Not because I was broken, but because I was sharpening myself. I began keeping a notebook. Every gesture, every glance, every phrase I caught. I became an observer in my own life, recording the little cracks in Daniel's mask, the cruelty that slipped from Grace's lips when she thought I wasn't paying attention. Every detail was a stitch in a net I was weaving, and one day I would tighten it around them. Still, there were nights when the weight crushed me. I would sit on the bathroom floor in the dark, my face buried in my knees, thinking about the man I had married. The man who once kissed me under the rain, who once danced with me barefoot in the kitchen when no music played. Where had he gone? Was he ever real? Or had I been nothing but a means to an end all along? Sometimes I would dream of my mother, her soft hands brushing my hair, her voice telling me to be strong. I would wake up and wish I could ask her what to do. But the grave keeps its secrets. And now I realized I had to learn to keep mine. 2 days ago, Dr. Patel had smiled at me in her office and said, "Your hearing is back." Tears had filled my eyes. The hum of the air conditioner, the shuffle of papers, the sound of her pen against the clipboard, it was like life flooding back into me. She told me to tell my husband that he would be so happy. I smiled back at her, but inside a stone sat where my joy should have been. I didn't tell him. I didn't tell anyone, because I needed to know who Daniel really was when he thought I couldn't hear. And now I knew. As I sat there in the dim light of the guest room, I whispered to myself so softly I barely heard it. "You think I'm deaf, but I hear everything now, and I will not forget." The house became a theater, and I was both the silent audience and the hidden playwright. Every gesture, every word, every sigh carried meaning now. I moved through the rooms like a ghost, pretending I couldn't hear the slam of a door, the murmur of conspiratorial whispers, the occasional sound of laughter I wasn't meant to share. At first, Daniel was cautious. He still played the part of a caring husband, leaving glasses of water by my bedside, helping me carry laundry, even brushing his hand across my cheek, as if tenderness still lived between us. But I watched his eyes, and they betrayed him. His gaze never lingered. His touch was mechanical. He was no longer with me. He was already elsewhere, planning, waiting for the moment to spring his trap. Grace's presence only grew bolder. She would wander the kitchen in her silk robe, her heels clicking like a metronome of arrogance, speaking out loud, as though narrating my failures to the walls. "She doesn't even realize how lucky she is," she muttered one morning, her back turned to me. "My son could have married someone who mattered. Instead, he's stuck playing nursemaid to a woman who can't even hold a conversation." I held my book tighter in my lap, my knuckles white, my lips pressed together. She thought I couldn't follow her words, but I could, and each one sank like a needle into my chest, stitching a wound that would not close. The cruelest part was how seamless their performance became when Daniel entered the room. Her voice turned honey-sweet, her hand reached to smooth my hair. Her questions feigned concern. "Do you need more tea, Anna?" She would ask, her smile warm but her eyes like knives. Daniel never noticed the change, or maybe he did and chose not to care. One evening, I lingered outside the study door while they spoke inside. Their tones were muffled, but I caught the sharp edge of their movements through the crack. My name lay sprawled across a document on the table. Daniel's finger tapped the paper impatiently. Grace's lips shaped one word again and again. Sign, sign, sign. I backed away before they noticed my chest pounding. Whatever trap they were setting, it was nearly ready. That night, I pulled my notebook from its hiding place and wrote furiously. Dates times expressions. My hand shook as I tried to piece it all together. They want me broken. They want the estate. They think I can't fight back. The page blurred as my eyes filled, but I didn't cry. Crying was wasted breath. Instead, I pressed the pen harder, carving the truth into the paper like scars. The following morning, I sat in Dr. Patel's office, her smile wide as she delivered the news. Your hearing is back. I should have rejoiced. I should have rushed to Daniel, fallen into his arms, shared the miracle. But instead, I smiled faintly and whispered, "Thank you." Inside, I felt only stillness, the kind of stillness that comes before a storm. When I returned home, I didn't speak a word. I continued the charade. I let them think I was trapped in silence, all while I listened, truly listened for the first time. And it was worse than I had feared. One morning, Grace sliced fruit at the counter, while Daniel leaned against the stove sipping his coffee. They didn't notice me standing in the hallway. "I'm tired of dragging this out," Grace muttered. "Just get her to sign the transfer papers. The house, the account. You're her husband, she'll believe you." Daniel rubbed his temples. "I've tried. She trusts me, but I don't know how long I can fake this." Fake this. The words seared into my brain. "She's too naive to suspect anything," Grace said dismissively. "What's she going to do? Scream call a lawyer? She can't even hear herself think." Daniel chuckled, a quiet, cruel sound that cut me more deeply than any scream ever could. "Yeah, it's easier this way. No interruptions, no questions. Honestly, being married to her like this, it's kind of convenient." My breath caught in my throat. Convenient. I was no longer a partner, a woman, a wife. I was a convenient silence, a backdrop to his lies. And then he said it. The sentence that burned into my bones that I will never forget. "If she never hears again, I won't be upset." I gripped the wall to steady myself, my whole body trembling. The man who once whispered love into my ear at midnight, who once swore I was his, everything was hoping I would stay broken forever. Not out of compassion, not out of love, but out of selfish convenience. I stumbled into the laundry room, pressing my back against the washer, my hand clamped over my mouth to stop the sob rising in my chest. In that moment, something inside me cracked. The woman who trusted, who forgave, who hoped she died right there. And in her place, a new woman was born. I would not beg. I would not plead. I would not cry in front of them again. I would listen. I would watch, and I would plan. For the next 2 days, I moved through the house like an actress in a play. I smiled when Daniel kissed my forehead. I nodded politely when Grace offered me tea. I sat quietly while they schemed their smug faces, convinced I was powerless. But behind my silence, I was preparing my own script. When they left one afternoon to shop together, I locked the door behind them and rushed upstairs. My mother's safe stood in the closet untouched since her death. My fingers trembled as I turned the dial, the code etched into my memory from the day she first whispered it to me. Inside her world lay waiting property deeds, bank statements, the will that carried her handwriting. She had left it all to me. Not because I was pitiful, not because she thought I needed protecting, but because she knew me. She knew Daniel's charm, his smooth lies, his calculating eyes. She must have seen something in him that I had been too blind to admit. Tears blurred my vision as I spread the documents across the bed. My mother's faith in me was the shield I hadn't realized I needed. With shaking hands, I photographed every page, uploaded them to a secure folder in the cloud, and emailed them to my lawyer, an old family contact who had always respected my mother. Then, for good measure, I sent copies to a new attorney, a woman recommended by a friend, someone sharp, relentless, with no patience for men like Daniel. When the files were safe, I pulled out the small digital recorder I had bought 2 days after my hearing returned. I carried it in my pocket, always on, always listening. Now I replayed their voices, crisp and undeniable. "If she never hears again, I won't be upset. She's too naive to suspect anything." I saved the file, backed it up 3 times, and stared at the device in my palm. They thought I was helpless. They thought silence had caged me, but I had turned silence into my weapon. That night, I cooked Daniel's favorite meal, pasta Alfredo with garlic bread, and poured wine with a steady hand. Grace laughed across the table, tossing her hair. Anna, you really should see someone about your hearing. Such a shame to live like this. I smiled faintly. I will, when I'm ready. Daniel raised his glass, his eyes glinting with false tenderness. You're strong. You'll get there. I looked at him across the candlelight, and for the first time in years, I didn't see my husband. I saw a stranger, a thief, a liar, a man who once kissed my forehead at my mother's funeral, now plotting to steal the home she had left me. But I didn't let the mask slip, not yet. Later that night, as they slept, I stood at the foot of the bed staring at their faces in the dark. Daniel's arm was slung carelessly across Grace's waist. No guilt, no shame, just smug contentment. I almost pitied them. Almost. Because they believed they had won. They believed I was nothing but a deaf, broken shell of a woman. They didn't know that the woman they mocked, the woman they dismissed, was gone. Tomorrow, I promised myself. Tomorrow I will speak. The morning sun filtered through the curtains, painting long stripes across the bedroom floor. I lay still, staring at the ceiling, my mind a storm of thoughts. The woman I had been, the silent, trusting, hopeful version of me, was gone. And in her place was someone Daniel and Grace had no idea existed. I rose quietly, dressing with deliberate care. The clothes no longer mattered to me. What mattered was control. Every movement, every smile, every nod had to be precise. They believed in my silence. They relied on it. So I would give them the silence they craved until I turned it against them. Grace was already in the kitchen, her perfume saturating the air like poison disguised as flowers. She glanced at me, her lips curling into that half-smirk I had grown to despise. "Morning, dear." "Still nothing?" she asked, tapping her ear mockingly. I smiled faintly, my practiced expression calm, serene. She laughed under her breath, dismissing me. But inside, my fury simmered sharp and cold. I wanted her to see me differently one day, not as broken, not as a burden, but as the reckoning she never saw coming. Later that afternoon, Daniel left his phone unattended on the table for the first time in weeks. The screen lit up with a message before he could snatch it away. I only saw one word: Vanessa. My stomach clenched. So she was still in the picture. Maybe not physically, but her shadow lingered, her presence alive in his thoughts, in his regrets, in the bitterness he wore like armor when he looked at me. My fingers itched to pick up the phone, to read the whole message, but I forced myself not to. No sudden moves. Not yet. Instead, I wrote it down in my notebook. Message from Vanessa. Afternoon. Smiled before hiding phone. Every detail mattered now. That night I lay in bed pretending to sleep. Daniel's breathing beside me was uneven, restless. He shifted sides, sat up, and padded quietly out of the room. I waited until the sound of his footsteps faded down the hall, then slipped silently after him. He was in the study, phone pressed to his ear, his voice hushed but urgent. I stood by the doorway, heart hammering, straining to catch every word. She still doesn't suspect, he whispered. I'll get her to sign it. Just a matter of time. He paused, then laughed quietly. Of course I'll be careful. Grace is keeping the pressure on. Don't worry, Vanessa, soon this will all be over. The name hit me like a blow. He wasn't just longing for her in memory, he was speaking to her, weaving her into the plot to strip me of everything. I backed away slowly, my nails digging into my palms until they left crescents in my skin. The betrayal was complete now. He wasn't just scheming with his mother. He was building a future with another woman while planning to erase me entirely. When I returned to bed, I stared at the ceiling in the dark, the decision already made. There was no going back. Daniel would never again see me as the wife who trusted him, the woman who once believed his love was real. No. From now on, he would see me as the woman he underestimated. The next morning, while they were out together, I retrieved the safe documents again. This time, I didn't just photograph them, I scanned them into my laptop, carefully organizing each file, labeling them with dates, and cross-referencing them with the notes I had made in my journal. The web of their betrayal was no longer just in my head. It was written, documented, undeniable. I called my lawyer from the hotel room I had secretly booked. My voice trembled as I explained, but she was calm, steady, reassuring. Anna, you've done the right thing, she said. With the will, the deeds, and these recordings, we can shut them down completely. They won't see this coming. Her words lit a fire in me. For weeks I had felt powerless, cornered, stripped of agency. Now, for the first time, I felt the strength of preparation humming inside me. When I returned home, Grace was waiting in the living room, her robe still wrapped tightly around her as though she were the queen of the house. She looked me up and down, her lips moving slowly so I wouldn't miss a single word. Pathetic, she mouthed. I tilted my head slightly, feigning confusion, and then smiled. She smirked back, certain of her dominance. But my smile carried a truth she didn't see. I was no longer afraid of her. That evening I cooked dinner again. The air was thick with garlic and cream, the flicker of candlelight casting long shadows on the walls. Grace raised her glass of wine, her laughter loud and false. Daniel reached for my hand across the table, his eyes soft, his mask firmly in place. For a moment, I allowed myself to remember. The boy I fell in love with in college, the man who held me when my mother died, the husband who once danced with me in the kitchen barefoot. But the memory faded quickly, replaced by the man who now sat in front of me, planning to steal the last piece of my mother's love, the man who whispered promises to another woman while using me as his shield. I excused myself early, retreating to the guest room. There I retrieved the small recorder from my pocket, its red light still glowing faintly. I pressed play and listened to their voices again, filling the room with the venom they thought I would never hear. If she never hears again, I won't be upset. She's too naive to suspect anything. I closed my eyes, tears slipping down my cheeks, not from weakness but from clarity. Each word was no longer just pain. It was power, proof, justice waiting to be delivered. For 2 more days, I maintained the act, smiling faintly, nodding, signing short phrases, as though sound still lived beyond my reach. Grace grew bolder. Daniel grew careless. They thought the net was closing around me, but it was my net that was tightening. On the 3rd morning, I woke with a calm I hadn't felt in weeks. Today was the day the silence broke. I moved slowly, deliberately, savoring the weight of the moment. Downstairs, Daniel sat at the kitchen table with his newspaper, sipping coffee as though his world wasn't about to collapse. He looked up briefly when I entered. "Morning, sweetheart," he said, his voice warm, practiced. I signed lazily, my face calm. "Morning?" He smiled faintly, turning back to his paper. For a few long minutes, I simply sat across from him, the storm inside me hidden behind my serene mask. I watched the man I once loved, the stranger he had become, the betrayer he truly was. And then slowly I opened my mouth. I heard everything. The words cut through the air like a blade. Daniel froze. His coffee cup hovered midway to his lips. The newspaper slipped from his hands. His eyes widened, his face draining of color. I leaned forward, my voice steady, strong. "I got my hearing back a week ago. I didn't tell you. I wanted to see who you really were. And now I know." His mouth opened, but no words came. Panic flickered across his face, his mask crumbling in an instant. And in that moment, I realized I was no longer afraid. Daniel's face drained of color, as if my words had pulled the very blood from his veins. He set the coffee cup down so abruptly it rattled against the saucer. What are you talking about?" he stammered, his voice breaking on the edges of fear. I stood slowly, each movement deliberate, my eyes never leaving his. "I heard you, Daniel. Every whisper, every lie, every plan you and your mother made." His lips parted, but nothing came out at first. The silence stretched heavy, suffocating. Then in a rush, he tried to recover. "Anna, please, you don't understand. It wasn't what it sounded like." I cut him off, my voice sharp. "Don't insult me with more lies." I listened. "I heard you say you preferred me deaf. I heard you scheme to take my mother's estate. I even heard you whisper Vanessa's name." That last word cracked him open like glass. His shoulders stiffened, his eyes flickered with a mix of guilt and anger. He started, then faltered. "Anna, I was confused. I didn't mean it the way it sounded." I laughed, bitter and hollow. "Confused?" "No, Daniel. Confused is forgetting where you put your keys. Confused is mixing up dates on a calendar. What you did was cold, deliberate betrayal. You plotted against me while I trusted you with everything." He stood now, knocking his chair back, his hands raised as if to calm me. "Anna, listen." "No." My voice sliced through the air. "For weeks I've been listening. Now it's your turn. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the recorder, pressing play. His own voice filled the kitchen, loud and undeniable. If she never hears again, I won't be upset. She's too naive to suspect anything. Daniel froze, his mouth opening and closing like a man drowning. You recorded me. Every word I said, my voice steady. And it's all backed up, sent to my lawyers. Along with the deeds, the bank statements, and your mother's whispers about stealing what my mom left me. You thought I was broken, Daniel. But I was watching. I was waiting. And now, I'm done. His face crumpled, shame and fury warring behind his eyes. You can't do this. You can't just throw everything away. We can fix this, Anna. Fix this. My voice rose, trembling with the weight of weeks of betrayal. How do you fix a man wishing his wife stayed broken forever? How do you fix a husband who looks at his deaf wife and sees nothing but convenience? How do you fix the memory of the man who used to hold me when I cried only to find he's been planning to steal from me with the help of his mother? At that moment, the front door opened. Grace stepped inside, a smug smile on her face, holding a paper cup of coffee. What's going on here? She asked, her voice lilting with false innocence. I turned to her, my hands steady even though my heart was pounding. I know, I said simply. She blinked, her smile faltering. Know what? I pressed play again. Her voice filled the room now, her mocking words echoing. She's too naive to suspect anything. Just get her to sign. The color drained from her face. She set the coffee down, her hands trembling slightly before she clenched them into fists. She's bluffing, she hissed. She has nothing. I stepped closer, my eyes never leaving hers. I have everything. Documents, recordings, proof. If either of you comes near me again, I'll file for a restraining order so fast your heads will spin. This is over. Grace's lips curled, her voice rising. You ungrateful little— Enough! I snapped the word, tearing out of me with a force I hadn't known I still carried. The sound of my own voice, strong and sharp, silenced the room. They both stared at me as though seeing me for the first time. And in that moment, I felt taller, stronger, no longer the fragile woman they thought they could control. I walked past them up the stairs and wheeled out the suitcase I had packed days before. On the way back down, I paused in front of the wedding photo on the wall, Daniel and I smiling, radiant, hopeful. I stared at it for a long moment, then left it hanging there like a ghost. Daniel followed me onto the porch, his voice breaking. Anna, please, don't do this. I made a mistake. I love you. I turned to face him, my eyes steady, my heart no longer shaking. No, you loved the quiet, you loved control, but you never loved me. Grace appeared in the doorway behind him, her face twisted with fury. But neither of them mattered anymore. Not their anger, not their lies, not their empty promises. A car pulled up to the curb, my lawyer had sent it. I lifted my suitcase, stepped off the porch, and slid inside without a backward glance. Through the window, I saw Daniel standing frozen, his hand half raised as though he could reach across the distance and pull me back. Grace hissed something into his ear, her face tight with panic. But I didn't hear her anymore. I didn't care. The engine started, the car pulling away. For the first time in weeks, I inhaled deeply, the sunlight warm on my face. I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I didn't look back. I was free. But freedom wasn't enough. Justice was still waiting. Because this wasn't the end of my story. It was only the beginning of theirs. The car hummed softly as it carried me away from the house that had become my prison. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass, watching the neighborhood blur past the trees, swaying gently, as if they alone understood the storm I had survived. My chest ached, not from regret, but from release. I wasn't running anymore. I was leaving on my own terms. The driver, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes, glanced at me in the rearview mirror. She didn't speak. Maybe she sensed I wasn't ready. My hands clutched the handle of my suitcase tightly, as though it contained not just clothes, but the fragments of my new life waiting to begin. When we reached the hotel, I checked in under the name I had given my lawyer, an alias. For the first time, I wasn't Anna, the broken wife Anna, the naive woman. I was someone else, someone free. The receptionist handed me the keycard without a second glance. I took the elevator up to the 7th floor, walked into the room and locked the door behind me. The silence there was different. It wasn't oppressive, it wasn't manipulative, it was mine. I sat on the edge of the bed, opened my laptop, and saw new emails waiting for me. My lawyer had already filed the paperwork, a cease and desist order against Daniel and Grace, documentation of the inheritance, copies of the recordings. She promised me in her message, "They won't be able to touch you, Anna, legally or otherwise." Reading her words, my shoulders finally relaxed. The weight I had carried for weeks, the fear that had gnawed at me in every quiet corner of the house, it began to dissolve. But beneath the relief, another ache remained. The ache of a love I had once believed in, now revealed as nothing more than illusion. I thought about Daniel's face when I told him I had heard everything. The panic, the desperation. Part of me wanted to hate him completely, to erase every memory we ever shared. But hate wasn't the right word. What I felt was deeper, more complicated. It was mourning. I was mourning the man I thought he was, the marriage I thought we had, the future I once dreamed of. And yet in that mourning there was power. Because the man who betrayed me didn't get to write my story anymore. I did. The next days passed in a blur of meetings with my lawyer. We sat in quiet offices lined with bookshelves, going through documents line by line. She explained my rights, my protections, the restraining orders being filed. Her calm, steady voice was an anchor I hadn't realized I needed. "Anna," she said one afternoon, leaning across the desk, "you're not just surviving this. You're reclaiming everything they tried to take. You're stronger than you think." Her words lodged in my chest like a spark, igniting something that had been buried under weeks of pain. Stronger than I thought. Yes, that was the truth. That was the... One evening, as I walked back to the hotel, the city lights flickered around me. People passed by laughing, holding hands, living lives that weren't shattered by betrayal. For a moment, envy pricked me. But then I realized I wasn't excluded from that world. Not anymore. I had stepped out of the silence. I was walking towards something new. I called an old friend, someone I hadn't spoken to in months. Her voice lit up with joy, and I found myself smiling, really smiling for the first time in what felt like forever. I told her everything, not all the legal details, not the recordings, but the truth of what I had been through. And she listened. She cried. She told me she was proud of me. That night when I returned to my room, I slept without fear. A week later, Daniel tried to call. My phone lit up with his name, but I didn't answer. He left messages, his voice shifting from pleading to angry to desperate again. Grace tried too, her words sharp, accusing me of ruining their lives. Each time I pressed delete, they no longer had power over me. The law was moving swiftly now. Their scheme was collapsing. And I was standing tall. But the most important moment came not from lawyers or documents. It came one quiet morning when I stood in front of the mirror in the hotel bathroom. I looked at my reflection, really looked. For weeks I had seen a ghost, a woman weighed down by silence and betrayal. Now staring back at me, I saw someone different, someone fierce, someone alive. I whispered to the mirror, "You're free." And for the first time I believed it. I didn't know exactly what the future held, but I knew one thing for certain: I would never again let silence be used against me. Silence had once been my prison, but I had turned it into my weapon, and I had won. If you've ever felt invisible, if you've ever been betrayed by the people you trusted most, I want you to hear me. You are not broken. You are not weak. You are not defined by the lies others tell about you. You have the power to rise, to fight back, to claim your voice, even when others try to steal it. Because that's what I did. I turned their betrayal into my beginning. And though Daniel and Grace may still sit in that house circling like vultures over what they thought was theirs, I know the truth. I know my strength. I know my worth. And I know that silence, when chosen, can be the loudest weapon of all. So this is my story. A story of love that rotted into betrayal. A story of silence that became my strength. A story of walking away, not with my head bowed, but with my heart lifted, my voice clear, and my future my own again. And if you've stayed with me until now, if my journey has stirred something in you, then I want to ask you something from the deepest place of honesty. Please like this video if it touched you. Share it with someone who might need to hear that they are stronger than they believe. Subscribe to this channel if you want to walk with me through more stories of truth, betrayal, survival, and the strength we carry even when we don't realize it. And leave me a comment below. Tell me, what would you have done if you were in my place? Would you have stayed silent longer or spoken sooner?